Welcome back to the deep dive. We all deal with it. That mental fog, the anxiety that just loops and loops, that feeling like you're just spinning plates all day. We're all looking for that one thing, that reliable tool to cut through the noise and give us some real mental clarity. We've all heard about mindfulness or meditation, but what if an ancient spiritual discipline is actually one of the most powerful, scientifically backed ways to build that resilience?
That is the absolute core of our deep dive today.
Yep.
We're going to explore the intersection of, well, consistent engagement with sacred texts, so daily reading, memorization, reflection, and modern neuroscience. And we're going to set aside the purely spiritual side for a moment and really focus on the hard data. Our sources suggest this isn't just, comfort for the soul. It's a literal, measurable lifeline for the brain.
That is a fascinating premise. So our mission here is to take the scientific evidence, the actual brain scans, the controlled studies, and really unpack how immersing yourself in these texts can literally rewire the physical structure of your mind. But we're talking about transformation at the deepest level, and it's all thanks to one key concept: neuroplasticity.
It really is the foundation for everything. Neuroplasticity, in simple terms, is the brain's built-in upgrade system. It's this remarkable capacity the brain has to adapt, to learn, and to evolve throughout your entire life. It's constantly forming and reorganizing new neural connections.
And for so long, the consensus was that once you're an adult, your brain is, well, it's fixed, like concrete. You could learn things, sure, but you couldn't fundamentally change the structure. What was the breakthrough that, shattered that idea?
It was the ability to actually see functional changes in real time with things like fMRI imaging. We discovered that your environment, your behaviors, and especially your consistent thoughts, they aren't just fleeting events, they're like active construction crews in your brain. Every time you focus intensely on something, you are physically strengthening a neural pathway. Every time you choose a positive response over, say, a stressed one, you're forging new, more efficient circuits. It's a tangible physical change. You can see it on a scan.
Okay, so if our thoughts are literally shaping our brains, we have to be incredibly intentional about the input we choose, which I think brings us to a really great way to visualize this, the whole analogy of the brain as a garden.
It's the perfect analogy. I mean, if the brain is a garden, then the things you do repeatedly are like watering certain seeds. Those negative thought loops, chronic worry, rumination, focusing on past mistakes, those are like powerful sticky weeds. And the more you repeat them, the deeper those unhelpful pathways get dug into the terrain.
And those deep ruts become the brain's default, right? They take less energy to travel, so we just get stuck in that habitual stress.
Precisely. And so the whole goal of this kind of reflection is intentional cultivation. The positive, intentional input dwelling on uplifting, constructive truths that acts like a consistent process of pruning the weeds and actively planting and fertilizing the good stuff. You're building circuits for things like gratitude and peace and resilience.
I think a key distinction here, and the source material really emphasizes this, is the difference between just passive exposure and, deep engagement. It's not about just scanning the page.
Oh, absolutely not. Passive reading might inform you, but it won't transform you. The real power, the thing that actually triggers neuroplasticity, comes from an active process. So that means pausing to really ponder a passage, committing a verse to memory, reflecting on how it applies to your actual life, and then trying to live it out. That's the intentional, focused practice that mirrors exactly what's studied in cognitive neuroscience. That effort is what forces the brain to rebuild.
Okay, so let's connect that active process directly to the measurable science. What specific structural changes do we see when people do this kind of sustained, focused mental work?
A great place to start is with the foundational studies, like that landmark Harvard research on focused mindfulness. They found that just 8 weeks of focused practice led to 2 critical structural changes that are incredibly relevant here.
Okay, tell us about the first one.
The first change was a measurable thickening of the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. Now, why is this a huge deal? The PFC is basically the CEO of your brain. It manages executive functions, rational decision-making, planning, attention, all of it. In our world, which is just saturated with distraction, anything that thickens and strengthens the PFC is a massive advantage. So this kind of focused reflection is essentially weightlifting for the CEO of your brain.
So we're not just feeling more focused. The actual physical part of the brain responsible for focus is getting stronger. Okay, what about the second change?
The second was a shrinking of the amygdala. The amygdala is the brain's ancient alarm system. It's the fear center. It handles threat detection and triggers that fight or flight response. When it's overactive, you're just hyper reactive to every little stressor. You're living in a state of low-grade anxiety all the time.
And consistent positive focus actually shrinks the alarm bell.
It literally reduces its mass and lowers its reactivity, and that is critical. By reducing the amygdala's volume, you reduce that immediate knee-jerk emotional reaction to daily stresses. You become less reactive, which allows that newly strengthened PFC to step in and apply some logic and calm. So more focus and less fear. That's the dual result.
That connection is just astonishing. But the evidence also points specifically to spiritual practices, right? Not just secular meditation.
It does, absolutely. Neuroimagic studies done specifically during spiritual practices like focused prayer or chanting or reciting sacred texts, they show heightened, sustained activity in those exact same brain regions, the ones tied to attention and emotional regulation. It seems the brain doesn't really distinguish between the source of the focused input. It just responds to the act of deep, sustained concentration.
And what I found most compelling in the source material was the research on toxic thoughts.
Yeah.
It gives such a hopeful and really actionable timeline for change.
Yes, and it raises a crucial point about consistency over intensity. The research shows you don't need hours a day. Focused reflection for as little as 12 minutes a day, just sustained over 8 weeks, was enough to produce what the researchers called a detoxification of toxic thoughts.
12 minutes. That is hardly intimidating. So what did that detox actually look like in the brain?
Well, that small commitment of time, just 12 minutes of intentionally redirecting the mind, was shown to shrink stress-related brain areas. And vitally, it boosted the natural production and regulation of neurochemicals like serotonin. And serotonin is just essential for mood stability, for impulse control, for feelings of well-being. So you get a structural shift and a chemical balancing act.
Right. And speaking of structural shifts, what about the act of memorization itself? We tend to think of it as rote learning, but when you apply it to meaningful text, it has a profound neuroplastic effect, doesn't it?
Oh, it's a cognitive powerhouse. When you commit passages to memory, especially ones that you're repeatedly contemplating, you are actively growing and enlarging the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is your brain's primary memory hub. It handles consolidating information, spatial memory, all of that.
So memorizing actually strengthens recall and builds cognitive reserve. That's a huge long-term investment for your brain.
Precisely. It enhances your ability to recall information when you're under pressure, and it builds up what's called cognitive reserve. That's a kind of resilience that acts as a buffer against age-related cognitive decline later in life. It keeps the wiring flexible.
We also saw mention of neurotheology, research connecting deep reflection to feelings of like peace and connectedness. How does that translate to brain activity?
This is where it gets a little abstract, but it's incredibly significant for anxiety reduction. Researchers found that deep engagement with sacred words can lead to a deactivation of the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is sort of the brain's internal GPS. It helps us figure out where I stop and the rest of the world begins.
So if you temporarily dial down that sense of strict individual separation, what happens?
You promote this profound, measurable sense of connectedness. People report it as peace or oneness, and that state significantly reduces the emotional burden of self-centered anxiety. And what's more, this regular reflection actively rewires the default mode network, the DMN. The DMN is the system that kicks in when your mind is idle. And for most people, an active DMN means mind wandering, worrying, and rumination.
Which in our modern world is probably activated constantly. So by engaging in this deep reflection, we're essentially retraining our own internal narrative.
You're curbing the negative chatter. You're intentionally forcing that network to calm down and focus on constructive input instead of just letting it loop through anxieties. When you look at all this evidence together, it's clear that ancient wisdom was providing a kind of behavioral blueprint for neuroplastic change thousands of years ago.
It really seems like the authors of these texts were essentially giving instructions for cognitive behavioral therapy before the field even existed.
If you connect it to the bigger picture, yes. They outlined a practical system for mental renewal that aligns perfectly with everything we know today. They didn't call it neuroplasticity, but they definitely recognized the brain's capacity for transformation based on focused, repetitive input.
Let's analyze one of the most powerful passages cited in the sources, the one about transformation. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
I mean, that instruction is basically the mission statement for neuroplasticity. When it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, it's not some gentle suggestion. It's a direct command to engage in the consistent, positive input needed to reshape your thought patterns. That word renewing, it implies a continuous active process. It's the brain garden in action.
And that process requires effort and frequency, which brings us to the ancient commands for repetition. Neuroscientifically, repetition is the only way to make a pathway automatic.
Absolutely. The instruction to keep sacred words always on your lips and to reflect on them day and night for success. That's a perfect example of behavioral science. It isn't just about cultural observance. It's a method for achieving what's called long-term potentiation.
Long-term potentiation.
It's the cellular basis of learning and memory. Put simply, the repeated firing of specific neural connections strengthens the signal between those neurons. It makes the path faster and easier to travel next time, so reflecting day and night ensures that pathway for focus and resilience is continuously reinforced.
And then there's maybe the most specific cognitive instruction of all that positive focus strategy. It reads like a checklist for choosing what thoughts to let in.
It is the ultimate blueprint for neuroplastic change through attention management. The text urges us to think about things that are, true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable. It's a directive to deliberately filter your mental input.
It's an active mandate to the prefrontal cortex, to the CEO, to curate attention.
Exactly. And by intentionally directing your attention to those virtuous, uplifting thoughts, you get this kind of triple win. First, you occupy your working memory with positive data, which crowds out space for negativity. Second, you reduce anxiety circuits because you're not feeding the fear center. And third, you actively build and strengthen those pathways for gratitude and joy and emotional stability. Modern brain imaging confirms it.
So that brings us to the most important question for you listening.
Yeah.
So what? What are the tangible daily benefits from these neuroplastic shifts? If I commit my 12 minutes a day, what am I getting?
You're getting structural resilience. We can really synthesize the benefits into 4 core categories. The first and most immediate is profound stress reduction and emotional balance.
And how does that actually look in practice?
Well, when you anchor your mind to comforting passages, for instance, an affirmation like, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing," you're giving your brain a cognitive anchor. This specific input acts to downregulate your body's stress response. It literally dampens the amygdala's reaction and lowers the production of cortisol. It interrupts the panic.
The second benefit was tied to the PFC, to the CEL.
Right, and that gives you sharper focus and memory. The calls to reflect day and night are functionally teaching you sustained attention. That repetitive engagement strengthens the prefrontal pathways, which improves your attention span, enhances your working memory, and just makes you better at filtering distraction all day long. It's a functional improvement.
And the third benefit is so crucial for anyone struggling with their mental health, overcoming negative thought loops.
This is that detoxification we talked about. You are systematically replacing unhelpful ingrained beliefs. So, for example, replacing a feeling of inadequacy with a declaration that I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And every time you choose that truth over the toxic thought, you reinforce the new resilient circuit and you starve the old one until it weakens. It's self-guided cognitive restructuring.
And the final one is that long-term investment, the protection for the future.
Long-term brain health. That continuous practice of reflection and memorization builds cognitive reserve, and the research is very clear. Maintaining mental engagement through life is one of our best defenses against age-related cognitive decline. It's an investment that pays dividends for decades.
So knowing all this, how do we make it stick? Our brains need that dopamine reward to form habits. What practical small steps do the sources suggest?
They're all pretty consistent. Start small. We know the brain is susceptible to change in just 12 minutes, so aiming for 10 to 15 minutes is highly achievable. And pick a time when you're naturally transitioning, like dawn or dusk, to sort of bookend your day with that positive input.
And what are the best methods to engage? Beyond just, scanning the page.
You have to engage the brain deeply. The methods are simple but powerful. Read the passage aloud. Hearing the words engages more neural regions. Journal your thoughts on the text that connects the meaning to your life. Or just focus on memorizing 1 verse a week. That active recall is essential for growing the hippocampus.
And Maybe most important for making it stick, track your progress.
Absolutely. Just tracking whether you showed up, not how well you did it, but just that you did your 10 or 15 minutes, that reinforces the habit. Hitting that small daily goal gives you the little dopamine hit that reinforces the circuit, making it easier to come back tomorrow.
And of course, tools can help structure this input. We saw the materials mention things like the Mind Savvy app.
Right, and tools like that are really designed to complement this individual work. They act as platforms that can curate positive inspirations, offer structures for collecting uplifting content, and make it easy to revisit. It just standardizes the input, which makes consistency much simpler, and that's exactly what the brain needs to strengthen those pathways.
This deep dive has shown us something incredible, that engaging with sacred texts isn't some passive, abstract activity. It is an active, physical reshaping of the mind that offers measurable benefits for focus, stress, and long-term health.
It's all about building enduring resilience, not just seeking a fleeting fix. The practice is about progress, rebuilding your mind, one focused moment, one neural pathway at a time. It really gives the brain what it needs to thrive in a world that is, frankly, designed for distraction.
That's a profound synthesis. We've highlighted how intentional focus, even for a short time each day, can fundamentally change your brain's structure for the better.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener, to maybe explore on your own. If we know the brain responds so powerfully to just 10 or 15 minutes of specific, repeated positive thought, what unexplored patterns of focus are we practicing unintentionally every day, through our doom scrolling or media consumption or our habitual worries? And what corresponding unhelpful neural pathways are they building in our minds without our awareness?
Think about the power you hold just by directing your daily attention. We encourage you to be intentional about the input you choose. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.